November 1965. America's involvement in Vietnam was escalating. With a new enemy and unfamiliar terrain, the U.S. Army prepared to unleash a revolutionary strategy, airmobile warfare. Today, we delve into the first major clash between American regulars and the seasoned soldiers of North Vietnam. A battle fought deep in the jungles of the Ia Drang Valley, where the courage of men met the terrifying reality of close-quarters combat, and the future of the war was shaped in blood. This is where America learned the true cost of Vietnam. This is the Battle of Ia Drang. In November 1965, in a remote valley along the Cambodian border, the future of the Vietnam War was written in blood and fire. The Battle of Ia Drang, fought from November 14th to 18th, was the first major engagement between the United States Army and the People's Army of Vietnam. It was a collision of doctrines, a test of revolutionary tactics, and a preview of the nightmare to come. What happened in the Ia Drang Valley would shape every decision, every strategy, every battle for the next 10 years. Both sides would claim victory. Both sides would learn lessons. But only one side truly understood what those lessons meant. By the fall of 1965, the American escalation in Vietnam was in full swing. Following the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964, President Lyndon Johnson had committed U.S. combat troops to South Vietnam. By November, over 180,000 American soldiers were in country, and more arrived every week. The mission was clear: find the enemy, fix them in place, and destroy them with overwhelming firepower. The strategy was called Search and Destroy. Use American mobility and technology to hunt down PAVN and Viet Cong units, force them into battle, and annihilate them before they could melt back into the jungle. But the PAVN had other plans. The North Vietnamese Command, led by General Vong Nguyen Giap, the architect of Dien Bien Phu, was testing the Americans. Could this new enemy be defeated? Could their technology be neutralized? Could their will be broken? The Ia Drang Valley would provide answers. The American unit sent to find those answers was unlike anything the world had ever seen: the 1st Cavalry Division, airmobile. This was not your grandfather's cavalry. There were no horses. Instead, the 1st Cav rode into battle aboard UH-1 Huey helicopters, hundreds of them, supported by armed UH-1B gunships and massive CH-47 Chinook transport helicopters. The concept was revolutionary: air mobility. Drop infantry anywhere, anytime. Bypass roads, rivers, and mountains. Resupply troops in minutes. Evacuate wounded immediately. Turn the entire battlefield into a fluid, three-dimensional chessboard where American forces could strike like lightning and vanish just as quickly. The 1st Cavalry Division had arrived in Vietnam in September 1965, establishing a base at An Key in the Central Highlands. Its commander, Major General Harry Kinnard, was a true believer in airmobile warfare. The question was, would it work in combat against a determined enemy? Each Huey could carry 8 to 10 fully equipped soldiers. The helicopters could cover 120 miles per hour, turning hours of jungle marching into minutes of flight. Fire support bases could be established anywhere. Artillery could be airlifted into position. Even damaged helicopters could be sling-loaded out by Chinooks. It was, on paper, a perfect system for the Vietnamese terrain. But it had never been tested in sustained combat against a first-rate enemy. That enemy was dug in near the Chu Pong Massif, a mountain range along the Cambodian border in Pleiku Province. Intelligence indicated that 3 full PAVN regiments, the 32nd, 33rd, and 66th, were staging there, preparing for major operations. Combined, these units numbered over 6,000 soldiers, well-trained, well-armed, and eager to test themselves against the Americans. The mission fell to the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, known as one of 7 Cav. Its commander was Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, a 43-year-old West Point graduate and Korean War veteran. Moore was methodical, deeply religious, and obsessed with preparation. He had personally read every after-action report from French defeats in Indochina. He studied Viet Minh tactics. He drilled his battalion relentlessly. Moore knew that airmobile warfare's greatest vulnerability was the landing zone itself. A Huey LZ could only accommodate a handful of helicopters at once. That meant his battalion, 450 men, would arrive in waves, vulnerable during the slow buildup. If the enemy was waiting, those first minutes could be catastrophic. Opposing Moore was Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Huey, an deputy commander of the PAVN forces in the region, and was a veteran of Dien Bien Phu, a student of Giap's doctrine, and a believer in close combat. The PAVN had learned a bitter lesson from fighting the French. Never give the enemy time to use his firepower. Close with him immediately. Grab the enemy by the belt buckle. Fight at such close range that artillery and air support become useless for fear of hitting your own men. On November 14, 1965, these two philosophies would collide. The 1st Cavalry was going to war, and the PAVN was waiting. November 14, 1965, 10:30 a.m. The first wave of Hueys descended toward Landing Zone X-ray, a small clearing at the base of the Chu Pong Massif, surrounded by elephant grass and scrub forest. Colonel Moore was aboard the lead helicopter. The plan was to insert his battalion, establish a defensive perimeter, and begin searching for PAVN units. The LZ was tiny, barely large enough for 8 Hueys to land simultaneously. That meant Moore's battalion would arrive piecemeal, 80 men in the first lift, then wait for the helicopters to return to Nkhi, reload, and come back. The entire insertion would take hours. The first soldiers off the helicopters were Company B, led by Captain John Herron. They spread out quickly, securing the tree line. The LZ was quiet. No enemy contact. The Hueys lifted off, rotor wash flattening the grass, and headed back for the next wave. The quiet lasted 15 minutes. Moore sent out reconnaissance patrols to probe the surrounding terrain. One platoon, led by 2nd Lieutenant Henry Herrick, moved west toward the mountain slopes. Within minutes, they encountered PAVN soldiers, not a patrol, but a company-sized force, moving toward the LZ. Herrick's platoon opened fire. The PAVN returned fire and charged. Within seconds, the battle exploded. Herrick's platoon, 27 men, was suddenly fighting for its life against overwhelming numbers. They fell back toward a small knoll, dragging their wounded. The PAVN pursued, pouring fire into the isolated Americans. Herrick radioed desperately for support, but he was 100 meters from the main perimeter, cut off by dense terrain and enemy fire. Moore ordered other units to push forward to relieve him, but the PAVN were already moving. Because Herrick's platoon had stumbled into something far larger than a patrol. They had walked directly into a staging area for the 66th PAVN Regiment, over 1,600 soldiers, preparing to assault the American LZ. By noon, the entire perimeter of LZ X-ray was under attack. PAVN soldiers poured out of the tree line in waves, firing AK-47s, throwing grenades, screaming as they charged. This was not guerrilla hit and run. This was conventional, massed assault, human wave tactics designed to overwhelm the Americans before they could organize. Colonel Moore, still waiting for the rest of his battalion to arrive, had fewer than 200 men on the ground. They were outnumbered nearly 10-1. The perimeter began to buckle. Moore grabbed the radio and called for everything: artillery, airstrikes, helicopter gunships, reinforcements. The response was immediate. Within minutes, 105mm howitzers from Fire Support Base Falcon, miles away, began dropping shells on the tree line. F-100 Super Sabre jets screamed overhead, dropping napalm and high-explosive bombs. The Huey gunships arrived, UH-1B Hogs, armed with rocket pods and machine guns. They made low, savage runs along the perimeter, pouring fire into the PAVN assault waves. The noise was deafening. The heat was overwhelming. The smell of napalm, gunpowder, and burning flesh choked the air. And still the PAVN came. Lieutenant Herrick's isolated platoon was fighting a separate, desperate battle on their knoll. Surrounded, running low on ammunition, they held on through sheer will. Herrick himself was hit, shot through the neck, but continued directing his men. One by one, his soldiers fell. Radios were shot to pieces. Medics were killed trying to reach the wounded. By mid-afternoon, Herrick's platoon had been reduced to a handful of survivors, huddled behind the bodies of their dead comrades. Back at the main perimeter, Moore's situation was stabilizing, barely. More helicopters arrived, braving intense ground fire to land reinforcements. Company A arrived, then Company C. Artillery fire intensified, creating a ring of explosions around the LZ. The PAVN assaults slowed but did not stop. By nightfall on November 14th, Moore had most of his battalion on the ground, over 400 men, but they were in a circular perimeter barely 100 meters across, surrounded by an enemy force that outnumbered them 3 or 4 to 1. Herrick's platoon was still cut off, their fate unknown. Casualties were already heavy, dozens dead, over 100 wounded. And then the sun went down. Night fighting in the jungle was a nightmare. Visibility dropped to nothing. Soldiers fired at muzzle flashes and shadows. Flares drifted overhead, casting grotesque, flickering light. The PAVN probed the perimeter constantly, testing for weak points, launching small assaults to keep the Americans exhausted and on edge. Moore rotated his companies, keeping half on watch while half tried to rest. No one slept. Artillery fire continued all night, harassment and interdiction fires, dropping shells randomly into likely enemy positions. November 15th. Dawn. As the sun rose over LZ X-ray, the battlefield revealed itself. Bodies, American and PAVN, scattered across the perimeter. The grass was torn up by explosions. Trees were shredded by machine gun fire. The smell was unbearable. Moore organized a relief force to reach Herrick's platoon. Company B fought their way through 100 meters of jungle, yard by yard, clearing PAVN positions. When they finally reached the knoll, they found 8 survivors. Lieutenant Herrick was among them, still alive but barely conscious. Of the original 27 men, 9 were dead, the rest wounded. They had held for over 24 hours. But the battle was not over. The PAVN commander, Lieutenant Colonel Un, was not done. He had committed only 2 of his 3 regiments. The 32nd Regiment was still fresh, and intended to use it to annihilate the Americans in one final, overwhelming assault. That assault came on the morning of November 15th. At 6:30 a.m., hundreds of PAVN soldiers charged the perimeter from multiple directions simultaneously. This was not probing. This was all in. The PAVN used the cover of morning fog to close within meters of American positions before being spotted. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted along the southern edge of the perimeter. Soldiers bayoneted each other. Grenades exploded in foxholes. A PAVN soldier threw a satchel charge into an American machine gun position, killing the crew instantly. The line began to break. PAVN soldiers poured into the perimeter. For a terrifying moment, it looked like the Americans would be overrun. Moore, standing in the open despite the fire, grabbed a radio and transmitted the most desperate call in military communication: "Broken Arrow." Broken Arrow meant imminent annihilation. It meant every available aircraft, every gun, every resource was to converge immediately on the caller's position, regardless of cost. The response was apocalyptic. Within minutes, the sky filled with aircraft. Jets dropped bombs within 50 meters of American positions. Helicopter gunships fired rockets directly over the heads of Moore's soldiers. Artillery fire became a continuous roar, shells landing every few seconds in a ring around the perimeter. The PAVN assault dissolved under the firestorm. Bodies piled up in front of American foxholes. The survivors fell back into the jungle, dragging their wounded. By mid-morning, the assault had been broken. The PAVN, having suffered catastrophic casualties, began to disengage. Small unit fighting continued throughout the day, but the main battle for LZ X-ray was over. On November 16th, fresh American units arrived to relieve Moore's battered battalion. The 17th Cavalry had held. They had survived. Against overwhelming odds, air mobility and firepower had prevailed. Colonel Moore counted his losses: 79 killed, over 120 wounded. PAVN bodies littered the battlefield, over 600 counted, likely hundreds more in the jungle. By the metrics of attrition, it was an American victory. But the battle was not over, because another American battalion was marching toward a different landing zone, and the PAVN were waiting. November 17, 1965. While Colonel Moore's battalion was being airlifted out of LZ X-ray, another unit, the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 2/7ths Cav, was ordered to march overland to a new landing zone, LZ Albany, located several kilometers northeast of X-ray. The 2/7ths Cav, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDade, consisted of over 400 men. They had been deployed near X-ray as a reserve force during the battle, but had seen no action. Now, they were moving through the jungle to Albany, where helicopters would extract them. The march began in the morning. The battalion moved in a long, strung-out column, standard procedure for jungle movement. The terrain was dense, towering trees, thick underbrush, and limited visibility. Navigation was difficult. The heat was oppressive. After the successful defense of X-ray, there was a sense of confidence, even complacency. The PAVN had been beaten. They were retreating. This was a routine movement, a march to pick up. But the PAVN were not retreating. They were repositioning, and they were watching. Lieutenant Colonel N, the PAVN commander, had withdrawn his battered regiments from X-ray, but he had not given up. He had tracked the American movements. He knew another battalion was marching through the jungle, and he positioned his remaining forces, elements of the 66th Regiment and the fresh 8th Battalion, 66th Regiment, directly in the Americans' path. The PAVN plan was simple: wait until the American column was strung out and vulnerable, then hit it simultaneously along its entire length. No warning, no escape, just overwhelming, close-range violence. At approximately 1:15 p.m., the lead elements of 2 of 7 Cav entered a clearing near LZ Albany. Scouts reported possible enemy contact ahead. Colonel McDade called a halt to investigate. The battalion stopped, spreading out along 500 meters of jungle trail. And then the world exploded. The PAVN ambush was devastating. Hundreds of soldiers, hidden in the trees and underbrush, opened fire at point-blank range. 20, 30, 40 feet. so close that muzzle flashes blinded American soldiers. Grenades flew through the air. Satchel charges detonated. Bugles blared. PAVN soldiers charged directly into the American column, firing AK-47s on full automatic. The American formation disintegrated instantly. There was no perimeter, no coordinated defense. The battalion broke into isolated pockets of soldiers, each fighting its own desperate, chaotic battle. Radios were shot out. Officers were killed in the first seconds. Soldiers fired in all directions, unable to distinguish friend from enemy in the smoke and confusion. Some men ran. Some froze. Some fought hand-to-hand with rifle butts and knives. The lead company, Company A, was hit first. Within minutes, nearly the entire company was dead, wounded, or pinned down. The command group, McDade and his staff, was overrun. McDade survived, but his ability to control the battle was gone. The battalion's command structure had collapsed. Company C, in the middle of the column, was cut off from the rest of the battalion. Soldiers huddled behind trees and anthills, firing blindly into the jungle. PAVN soldiers crawled through the undergrowth, tossing grenades into American positions. Wounded men screamed for medics who couldn't reach them. Company D, at the rear, initially avoided the worst of the ambush but soon found itself fighting from all sides. Sergeant Major Basil Plumley, a legendary hard-bitten veteran who had jumped into Normandy on D-Day, organized a defensive position, screaming orders and shooting PAVN soldiers at close range. But even Plumley couldn't hold back the tide. 4 hours, the fighting raged without let-up. Unlike at X-Ray, there was no coordinated artillery support. No gunships could safely engage. The Americans and PAVN were too intermixed. Airstrikes were impossible for the same reason. Soldiers were on their own, fighting for survival in small groups. The jungle became a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay everywhere, draped over logs, sprawled in the grass, piled in shell craters. The wounded lay where they fell, some bleeding out because no one could reach them. As darkness fell, the PAVN began to withdraw. They had achieved their objective, inflicting maximum casualties and breaking the American formation. They melted back into the jungle, carrying their own dead and wounded. The survivors of 2 of 7 Cavs spent the night in the jungle, forming small defensive circles, listening to wounded men crying in the darkness. Relief forces, including elements of Moore's 1 of 7 Cav, arrived after nightfall but could do little in the dark. November 18th. Dawn. The sun rose on a scene of unimaginable carnage. The trail was littered with bodies. Over 150 American soldiers dead, 124 wounded. Some companies had lost more than half their men. Medics worked frantically to stabilize the wounded and prepare them for evacuation. The PAVN had suffered heavily too. Estimates suggested over 400 killed, but they had achieved a strategic victory. They had ambushed a U.S. battalion in broad daylight and nearly destroyed it. They had proven that American mobility could be turned into vulnerability. LZ Albany became one of the bloodiest single engagements for U.S. forces in the entire Vietnam War, and its lessons would haunt American commanders for years to come. When the guns finally fell silent in the Ia Drang Valley, both sides counted their dead and claimed victory. The Americans totaled their losses, 305 killed, nearly 500 wounded. The PAVN casualties were far higher, over 1,200 confirmed dead, likely hundreds more. By the cold calculus of attrition, the U.S. had won. But victory in Vietnam was never that simple. For the United States military, the Battle of Ia Drang provided exactly the confirmation it wanted. General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, saw the battle as proof that American strategy was sound. The lesson Westmoreland took was clear: airmobile tactics worked. Helicopters could deliver overwhelming combat power anywhere. American firepower, artillery, airstrikes, gunships, could destroy any PAVN unit foolish enough to stand and fight. The U.S. had a kill ratio of 4 or 5 to 1. At that rate, the enemy would be ground down through sheer attrition. This reinforced the strategy that would define the American war effort: search and destroy. Find the enemy. Fix them. Kill them faster than they could replace their losses. Use body counts as the metric of success. Win through superior firepower and technology. It was a strategy that would fail. Because the PAVN learned a very different lesson from Ia Drang, a lesson that would shape their tactics for the next decade. The North Vietnamese commanders recognized they could not win a conventional battle against American firepower. At X-ray, they had attacked in waves and been slaughtered by airstrikes and artillery. The cost was unsustainable. But at LZ Albany, they had found the answer: close quarters ambush. By attacking at extremely close range, grabbing the Americans by the belt buckle, they negated U.S. advantages. Artillery couldn't fire danger close. Jets couldn't drop bombs. Helicopters couldn't engage without hitting their own men. In close combat, the battle came down to will, endurance, and acceptance of casualties. The PAVN strategy evolved: avoid set-piece battles. Never fight on American terms. Control the tactical distance: when to engage, when to withdraw. Hit logistics, ambush patrols, attack at night, and break contact before U.S. firepower could be brought to bear. Fight a war of attrition, but attrit American political will, not just their soldiers. It was a strategy of protracted conflict, one the PAVN could sustain, and the Americans could not. The Battle of Ia Drang established the pattern for the rest of the Vietnam War. For the Americans, reliance on helicopters, massive firepower, and the belief that technology could overcome determination. For the PAVN, patience, tactical flexibility, and the willingness to absorb horrific casualties in pursuit of strategic victory. Today, the Ia Drang Valley is quiet. Memorials stand at landing zones X-ray and Albany, honoring the soldiers, American and Vietnamese, who fought there. Veterans return, seeking closure for battles that never truly ended in their minds. The helicopters are long gone. The jungle has reclaimed the landing zones. But the echoes of Ia Drang remain, in the tactics of modern counterinsurgency, in the debates over technology versus human factors in war, in the understanding that firepower alone cannot win wars of ideology and will. The Battle of Ia Drang was the first, but it was not unique. For the next decade, young Americans would climb aboard Hueys and descend into jungle landing zones, searching for an enemy who chose when to fight and when to vanish. And each time, the same questions would haunt them. What are we fighting for? How do we measure victory? And when can we go home? In the Ia Drang Valley, those questions were first asked. They would never be satisfactorily answered. The Battle of Ia Drang, though tactically a U.S. victory, came at a staggering human cost. Both sides claimed success, but the lessons learned here would define the strategies for the remainder of the war. For the Americans, Ia Drang validated airmobile tactics and the power of overwhelming firepower. For the North Vietnamese, it confirmed the effectiveness of grabbing the enemy by the belt buckle, fighting at such close range that American air and artillery superiority was nullified. From this valley, a new, brutal template for the Vietnam War was established. A conflict of attrition where the enemy dictated the terms of engagement, transforming Ia Drang into a profound and tragic strategic turning point. If you want to understand the monumental struggles and the lasting lessons of modern warfare, make sure you subscribe to History of Conflicts. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment below. We want to know, how much did the experience of Ia Drang, particularly at LZ Albany, contribute to the U.S. Army's later reliance on overwhelming firepower, even at the cost of precision? Thanks for watching.